Okay, hello, welcome to another Jog Pod with Mr. Unite and Mr. Hatchell will also be joining us today. So today we're going to be looking through the first sort of page of topic 5, urban futures. Okay, so we'll keep it nice and quick for you. Okay, let's get straight into it. When we talk about the word urban, we're thinking about, built up areas, towns and cities. And we want to think about, therefore, is why or where our place is becoming more urban. Okay, so this top bit here just talks about how urbanisation, a process of places becoming more urban, is basically the increasing amount of people living in those sort of areas. And in 2007, the UN announced that for the first time, more than 50% of the world's population live in urban areas. Essentially, this entire topic is all about that key concept. What is life like in urban areas? Why do people want to move there? And ultimately, what are the opportunities and challenges that come from that? Okay. So with this, okay, we can move straight on to this sort of second section, which talks about settlement hierarchies. In simple terms, okay, we want to think about how different services, such as post office, schools, the infrastructure that's there will change depending on the size of the settlement, okay? So obviously, for small settlements, we might have what's called low order services such as post offices. So think about your local rural villages that maybe have, a BP garage type thing, maybe just as an isolated thing. They might have the post office. Maybe they might still even have a library potentially. Those sort of things. But in our larger settlements, or what we call conurbations, so areas that join up together, we might have what's called a larger sphere of influence. They might have a large supermarket, range of retails units, major stores and brands such as, I don't know, Greggs, because I'm thinking about food potentially. There we go. But also with this, okay, if I think about Biggleswade, as some of I'm sure you know, Biggleswade now has the A1 retail park. So as they built that, its sphere of influence, or in simple terms, the area of which people are then interested in it, okay, and therefore will travel to it, has increased. People will travel from Baldock, Stevenage, from people that I know, to come and visit Biggleswade to go to the retail park. So its sphere of influence is increasing. So simple terms, in terms of urban areas, we have very small ones like towns and villages, and we have larger settlements like towns, and then obviously on the large scale, major conurbations like Birmingham, Manchester and London. And then we've got the sphere of influence, which is essentially how far people are willing to travel to go and get the things that they need from that urban area. So 2 more key terms that you'll recognise, okay? Megacity, generally the groups that I teach are really confident with this. It's something that always sticks in their mind. Essentially, what makes a city mega is, do they have 10 million people or more? And essentially, what we want to remember here is that most of our megacities are in what we call EDCs, or emerging developing countries, and LIDCs, or low income developing countries. Often, okay, in our AEC countries, we think about, Paris, London, and Paris in France, ourselves with London in the UK, and in the US, they've got places like Los Angeles and New York. Okay, so those are all megacities in terms of those particular places. But the majority of them, as you can see from the map, are in Asia. Okay, so we're thinking obviously China, India. Okay, there are some major ones also in South America, and as you can see, places like Lagos and stuff like that within Nigeria as well. Okay, and that is because the amount of people that are moving are much higher in terms of our EDCs and LIDCs. They're moving from those rural areas as the country develops to look for jobs and other income within the cities. Okay, and as you can see, there's a nice little fact there about how it's predicted to increase from 28 to 41% by, not percent by country, from 28 to 41 by 2030. Okay. But with this, okay, we can not just think about how important a country is in terms of the amount of people that live there in its cities, but also how important is a city in terms of trade and business. As I'm sure you're aware, if I mentioned to you about New York, Tokyo, Paris, you know about those places. You probably know what they look like. You probably know some brands. You maybe know some key locations because they are so well known, in terms of our media and things like that, TV, film, stuff like that. So most of those ones that have the reputation are mostly within ACs. Mostly that's because they're the countries that are developed. They're the ones that have got their information out through globalization already. However, in emerging developing countries, places like India, okay, you're starting to learn more about those places, but also in Russia, we've obviously got Moscow, which I'm sure you've heard of. So what is it then that's driving this change? So again, we've gone back to the top really, why are more and more people living in cities? Why is that urbanisation increasing so much? Why are we seeing more megacities in our developing countries? Essentially, this comes down to two key things. Essentially, what we call push factors and pull factors. The reason why people move from a rural to an urban area. Push factors are sort of negatives of what we think about of our rural area. So I might be living in a rural area, therefore natural disasters impact on me much more severely than if I was in a city. Think about, Haiti or, even more developed countries where if you're in a city, you have more access to emergency services and things like that. In a rural area as well, war and conflict will be much more severe. The effects of drought and other climatic hazards will be more severe. There is more safety, more services within those urban areas. So we're deciding to be pushed away for those negative reasons. We've also got a term called mechanisation. This will also appear within the sort of the UK in the 21st century, where we think about how the role of mechanised machinery, okay, so effectively, tractors and things like that, more factories, gets rid of the need for more people to live in rural areas because we no longer need more people to work or plough the fields. We simply have more machines to do it. So therefore people go, well, now I don't really have a job, I'm not needed, I need to move to the rural area. From the rural area to the urban area. But what this means on the flip side, though, is we don't just have the negatives of our rural area. The urban area has what we call the bright lights. Okay, so bright lights, like, attract moths to them. We think about the reasons why we may want to move to or be pulled into an urban area. Things such as better jobs or more jobs, better education and healthcare, better overall quality of life, and simply maybe previous family members have moved there. Maybe now they've got a job, they've got a house, an area to live, the other members may then follow. So really simple, we want to think about push and pull factors and how that leads to an increase in urbanisation. Last thing for me, ladies and gents. So what does this mean then? If we have more people moving into our urban areas, especially at such rapid rates in our LIDCs, there are going to be challenges and pressures that occur. We break these down into social, economic, and environmental. I won't read all of them, but I'll give you a brief overview. Okay, as you know, in LIDCs, as Mr. Hatcher will talk about potentially with the Kibera, as people move in, there may be little official housing available. So this creates the rise of slums, or otherwise known as shanty towns in Africa, or slums across sort of Asia, and in Brazil, they're known as favelas. Well, what might this mean? Okay, is obviously therefore the infrastructure can't keep up. As you know, the problems within slums is there's a lack of provision for education, for healthcare, access to clean water, sewage systems, all of those things that come with it. In terms of economic, okay, maybe there may not be enough formal jobs. So maybe they go into unemployed areas and therefore they turn to crime. Alternatively, if they can't get a job in what's called the formal sector, so paid, insured, you've got a contract, you're safe, you've got rules and regulations, they may work in what's called the informal sector. So maybe it's simply shining shoes on the sidewalk. Maybe it's working in a factory with no contract. But obviously with the risk of that, okay, suddenly the boss may decide we don't want you anymore, they get rid of it. The health and safety within the factory could be very limited. There's some really great documentaries out there about these sort of things, especially on places like Dharavi, which is a slum in Mumbai. So loads of stuff if you want to go and have a little wider bit of research. And obviously, as you know, in terms of environmental consequences, they don't have because they're not official areas, they don't have binmen and that sort of infrastructure to remove human waste, but also general rubbish. So that's why river environments become polluted and why our slums are generally so covered in rubbish and things like that. Along with this, obviously, lots of people in one space creates congestion, which again can create pollution. If people don't have access to electricity and energy, they may be forced to burn fossil fuels or other sort of non-renewable sources, which create, again, further issues of air quality. In particular, you might see that people burn plastic because it's one of the only things they can find through rubbish and that sort of source. And therefore, they burn that as a source of fuel, which obviously is very bad for the environment, but also for people's health. Ladies and gents, that's the end of my little section. We're now going to go over to Mr. Hatchell, who's going to talk us through some other key terms that you need to know outside of urbanisation. Mr. Hatchell, over to you.
Mr. Knight, can you go over to Kibera? Because I think that might link really well with what you've just discussed.
Yeah, let's do that. I guess that makes sense. Like it.
Excellent. So, as Mr. Knight just said, there are major consequences of rapid urbanisation, of lots of people moving to urban areas in LIDC countries. And one of those examples that you could use really well in an exam is Kibera, and that is in Kenya. Now, the question that you would be asked would be along the lines of, explain the consequences of rapid urbanisation in an LIDC you have studied. So Kibera is a really good one to use for this. Kibera is an area in Nairobi, and Nairobi is the capital city of Kenya. So Kenya has a population of 41 million, about 2/3 of the UK's population. Nairobi, the capital city, has a population of 3 million. And of those 3 million, 1 million people live in the Kibera slum. Apologies for that spelling mistake. So yeah, 1 million people live in the Kibera slum. That is a lot of people in a very small area. Now, what you need to know essentially is the social, economic, and environmental impact of that urbanisation. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple of these, not all of them, but they're on screen for you. So the social impacts, the impacts on people. Well, 80% of people in Kibera live without electricity at all. So they can't use lights, heating, cooking is quite difficult, etc. There is high rates of diseases and low life expectancy. So diseases such as cholera actually affect lots of people here. And that's because of an environmental issue, which is pollution. And also houses are overcrowded. Generally, you have 8 people to one house, and one house is around 12 by 12 foot. Now, if you can try and imagine that, that is much smaller than one of our classrooms, and there are 8 people in it. So much smaller, and they live there. Remember, it's not just there for an hour. They actually live there. The economic consequences or impact of urbanisation in Kibera include the fact that 50% of the people who live there, so 500,000 people, are unemployed. And businesses are limited in their development because infrastructure is very poor. Again, low electricity levels, low access to water that's clean and fresh, and so on. And finally, the environmental impact of urbanisation there include, as I mentioned before, large-scale pollution issues, particularly in the rivers, open drainage, whereby this is where people get ill, and as Sir said earlier, there might not be any official bin services or bin men to collect the rubbish. Heavily populated overcrowding problems, and also, as I mentioned, river pollution. Now, just 2 points on how this is being managed in Kibera and how it can be managed. So one is that aid agencies, like Oxfam, for example, have added healthcare facilities to the area to try and treat people with diseases such as cholera and stop it spreading. And another thing is that 2 pipes by these aid agencies have also been installed in recent years for these 500,000 people that has clean water to try and reduce illnesses from people drinking water that is not clean. Okay, so they are the ways in which the Kibera slum is being managed. So that is a really useful example of how you can explain the problems that an LIDC place faces because of rapid urbanisation. So, can you move to counter-urbanisation, please?
Love to, sir. Just on that slum, I think it's about something like 2.5 square kilometres, Kibera. So yeah, 1 million people in that sort of size. So yeah, crazy numbers for the amount of space. Definitely densely populated.
Yeah, well, Shefford, if you take Shefford as a whole, is much bigger. So, and if you think about how
many, I wouldn't know my local Shefford.
Yeah, so think about how many people live in Shefford. It is much less than
yeah, definitely nothing like it, sir.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the problem that they are facing. Lots of people crammed into one small area.
Okay, then. What's counter-urbanisation? What's that when it's at home?
So basically, we're going back to key terms now, and I'm going to go really quickly now because these are not massively important. You just need to be aware of how you describe what they are. Okay, so counter-urbanisation, mainly in developed nations, is the movement of people from an inner city area, so the centre of a city, to a rural or countryside area. And the reasons why people might be pushed away from a city area might include overcrowding, pollution, traffic problems, as I said, pollution from CO2 in cars, and unemployment. The reason why people might want to move to the countryside is because of the fact that there are open green spaces, there's better housing facilities, they're more modern, and traffic will be much improved generally because of better public transport. So that is what counter-urbanisation is. Let's move on to suburbanisation. And actually, suburbanisation is quite similar, except for it's people moving from city centres just to the outskirts of the city. So not quite rural, but suburban, okay? So just outside the city centre where it is still leafy and green, but not very far away. So again, the push and pull factors here are really similar actually, because these types of areas are quite similar. So again, people move to the suburbs because of the open, friendly spaces, where they can spend their lives there with their families. There's parks and things like that. The houses are a bit better. There's more space around them and in them. And there is better and improved public transport, as well as cheaper land prices, so therefore cheaper rents. So we're just going to move quickly on then to the consequences or the problems that suburbanisation brings, okay? So these are the problems that are happening because of people moving from city centres to just outside of them, okay? So environmental problems that happen are because new houses are being built, we are destroying the countryside habitats, so the plants and animals. And also, we are actually adding more cars to the outskirts of the city. So eventually that might cause more air pollution and traffic problems over time. In terms of economic consequences, remember this is to do with wealth and money and employment. So city centres, if people start to leave them in large numbers, the city centres actually become deserted. They become places that were really powerful economically that are no longer powerful. They become deprived of the wealth they need. And also, unemployment increases in those city centres, which means that poverty and the cycle of poverty begins. And finally, the consequences of suburbanisation socially are that the offices and businesses that were in the city centre are abandoned because people move out away from them. And what we also find is that what happens over time is ethnic segregation. So you tend to find that some ethnicities populate a certain area of the city and other ethnicities tend to move out away from the city. And that's not good for social cohesion, and it's not good for a society that's trying to work together. Mr. Unite, any questions?
No, really good, sir.
Brilliant.
Nice and clear. Yeah. So just for me, it's thinking about if people move to the rural areas, they often lose the amount of services and benefits that the urban area might have. The theatres, the cinemas, the quality shops. So that's why people might choose to prefer, as you sort of discussing there, to live just on the outskirts of a city where those services are still much more readily available, maybe not as costly. So there's one more sort of definition. It's called reurbanization. What can you tell me about that?
Oh, reurbanization is actually when people move from the suburbs or the outskirts back into the city centres and town centres, back into the urban areas. Okay, and this happens mainly with younger people because younger people want to go into those urban areas to get the jobs of the future and so on. So that's why them people might want to move into urban areas. Now,
so not me and you, sir. Not me and you. We're old now, right?
Oh, no, we're too old for that now. So the push factors, the reason people move back into urban areas may be things like lack of jobs in rural areas. Okay, so not being able to get a job in a rural area. Also, as Sir just mentioned, there is generally less leisure facilities in the rural areas and less entertainment. And younger people tend to use leisure and entertainment a lot, so therefore they might want to go back to this town or city to use those. And also, because lots and lots of people may move to the suburbs or the rural areas, house prices in those areas may increase dramatically. And that means it actually becomes slightly cheaper, maybe, to move back into the urban area because everything you want is there. In terms of pull factors, what have urban areas got to offer people, right? So basically, what we do is we redevelop on what's called brownfield sites. And these are sites in cities that have been used in the past for something else, that are rebuilt on for housing mainly to improve the area. We also have the fact that young people, 18 to 25-year-olds mainly, are attracted by universities, so they will move to the town or city area for the university. And as we mentioned before, these urban areas offer entertainment facilities, and why wouldn't you want to live near all the entertainment you could possibly need? So that is why people might move to urban areas from the rural areas. So last kind of sections now. We're looking at reurbanization still here. Okay, so people moving back into urban areas and the consequences of it. So the problems that it actually brings. I say problems, but it can also be positive impacts that it brings. So socially, what happens? What's the consequences for people? Well, a good thing is shops and services in the town or the city may benefit from more residents buying more things. But there may also be increased tension and conflict between new and older residents. House prices may actually increase then in the urban area because more and more people are demanding those houses. Schools benefit because more students want to go there, it increases their profile. And finally, more jobs, but less employment within an area. So obviously there's more jobs to cater for more people, but actually, sometimes that can reduce the amount of employment because of the amount of people moving into an area. And actually also, that goes the opposite way. There can be less unemployment too if the amount of jobs keeps up with the amount of people moving into the urban area. In terms of environmental consequences, I'm just going to do two here. So they are that the redevelopment of brownfield sites improves the old industrial and polluted areas. I mentioned earlier, brownfield sites is redeveloping or rebuilding on a site that used to be used for something else or built on. And that actually improves the general environmental quality of the area. It can also create pollution because there's more use of the site, but generally it's considered to be a very good thing, and it's better than building on countryside land. And also related to that, it decreases the pressure on greenfield areas. So it decreases the amount of times we have to build on the countryside areas that we want to keep as natural as possible. And finally, economic consequences of reurbanization. Economic consequences of people moving back into urban areas. New shops, new services, improving the local economy, more jobs available. And finally, tourism also. The more popular and more populated an area is, the more people that live in it, the more people that may visit it. So that might bring an overall economic positive impact to the area. Mr. Unite, any questions?
No, really nice and clear, sir. I think we've hit all those key bits, picked up some of those other terms that we maybe not mentioned as much, for me, like brownfield and greenfield recently. So yeah, really nicely explained, really nice and clear. So I believe in our next jog pod, so we're going to continue this theme, but think about how there's opportunities and challenges in an AEC country and an EDC country.
Brilliant, thank you, sir. So we're going to end this recording here and go straight to the next one on urban futures.